Cougs house. The Houston Cougars get it done on the road once again. And I feel like people are concerned about the way it ended, even though it was a blowout.
You are Locked On Coogs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Coogs, daily podcast about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth, here to break down all things Cougs. And if you're a Houston fan or just a hater who came to stop by, thank you for making Locked On Cougs your first listen, or let's say it's maybe your last listen of the day, as this is a live post-game reaction show. First of all, thank you guys for rocking back with me after taking a few days off. Bluntly had to attend a funeral in a small town, had to get there and back and forth and things like that. And that took away from some recording time. And I am so happy to be back talking about Houston Cougar basketball and a big win, 80-65. Could not think of a better thing to come back doing. Now, I will talk some about the different things in this game that stuck out. And I liked a couple different rotations and lineups. But I think on the whole, a lot of people have those concerns as of late that I actually see pop up in the chat a little bit right now as well. So we'll address those. But first and foremost, Houston improves to 22-4 on the shoulders of an 80-65 win. Multiple guys in double figures. Malik Wilson with 12 off the bench. Criley's away with 18. Sharp has 17 away. It kind of feels like you're welcoming him back almost. Got hot in the second half. Hit 4 second half threes. I think it was 4 or 5 in the second half. That's pretty big time. Roberts finished with 10. It felt like he had more than that. Same with Milos Uzan. But I think the big deal here is you kind of had this well-rounded effort from basically everyone but Tugler. Tugler played just 8 minutes in the official book on this one with the foul trouble. Honestly, it felt like less than that. He did manage to get his 4 points, a couple rebounds, a block, or that kind of stuff, but he had those 5 fouls, which ultimately kind of stifled his impact in the ballgame. What I like that Houston did in this one was, honestly, once they kind of got that cushiony comfort lead, it felt like they were deliberately working on things to get ready for weeks ahead, right? They, in the second half, got downhill and got kickouts to Emanuel to get him kind of going. They got LJ Cryer working more on the ball, so that way he can like have more point guard type of reps for if they ever need him to run the point position. A lot of different lineups, in part because of foul trouble, but in part just because they were working different things. They got Terrance Arceneaux and Malik Wilson at that 4 spot to kind of have a little bit of a small ball lineup. Really intrigued by a lot of the different things that Houston's able to get done in this one on that end. Defensively, I think what's interesting here is, as a coach, and again, I coach high school basketball, and I feel like what was interesting in this one was it felt like they were totally cool with certain guys from Arizona State shooting certain shots. Arizona State shot 43.2% from the field, which isn't horrible. A lot of those makes, though, came in the last 4-minute stretch against reserves. Houston was comfortable early in this one letting guys clank off threes that had no business shooting them. The number 44 could give a hard time to Richie, the host of Locked On Sun Devils, on Twitter. He was 2 of 5 from 3. I didn't know he was shooting them out there that far. BJ Freeman was 2 of 7. Bashim Dehad is 0 of 2. They let guys that had no business shooting threes shoot threes a lot. That was kind of a textbook scouting report kind of game. Like, hey, if 44 beats us out there, we'll live, right? Those kinds of moments for Houston. And on the whole, I think that's what's interesting about this one is, like, for your second road game in 48 hours, and they did go back to Houston in between, which I think going into the weekend, I didn't necessarily click that they were going to do. But they went to Arizona on Saturday, went home Saturday night, had as traditional a Sunday, Monday as they could have, and then went back to Arizona State, to Tempe to play Arizona State. And I think what's interesting about that is letting them go through that, I guess, made this game feel more normal, but you kind of relied on that scouting report kind of thing helping you out to a victory as opposed to like fresh legs if you'd stayed there And the scouting report thing comes into play when you go home and you have traditional practices and you have more traditional film review and you're just in your routine. And so I think that's where that kind of a thing showed up, where it might not have been what I do, but that's obviously what Sampson does. And that's what, I mean, he gets paid the big bucks, coach the best team in America in a lot of years. And so I think that's what's showing through there. Houston did look like they had their legs under them for the most part. Obviously, Tugler's foul trouble didn't feel like he ever got his legs under him in the course of the game. On the whole, it did not look like Houston was like tired or worn out or any sort of fatigue factor from all the travel and road games and stuff like that lately. And they really kind of got after it. They didn't force many turnovers as I maybe would have thought they were going to do it against Arizona State. And I guess if I were trying to be a pessimist, that might be one of those moments where I see Houston looking tired, right? Because a fresh-legged Houston might have forced more. Arizona State's not the most efficient team in America or anything like that. But ultimately, Houston gets the job done 80-65 and a nice conference win over the Arizona State Sun Devils, and a night where the conference kind of got turned upside down in a lot of ways. Outside of Houston, a lot of big dogs lost at the top of the conference. The gap between Houston and number 2 continues to expand. We'll talk more about that in our second segment here too. But I again the chat for a second. Matt says a couple things here that Sharp might be back from the foot injury. I thought Sharp looked a lot better in the second half once he saw one go in. Shooting the basketball is a weird thing. There's no science to this, but once you see one go in, you typically start to see more go in. That's why when you're a coach and you're coaching kids up and they miss a couple threes, say, hey, go get a layup, see the ball go through the net once, right? Kind of the confidence comes back in what you're doing, your mechanics. Emanuel looked like more comfortable after that first 3 went in. He just started pulling. 4 of 7 from 3 is very much the Emanuel that we've been used to seeing since before this foot injury for sure. Matt also chimed in. That was interesting that Arceneaux got to play the 4 instead of putting Lott in when Tugler and Francis were both in foul trouble. I think that's interesting because I've thought at different points of the year, and we talked about on the show, that the 4 guard with Arceneaux playing the 4 guard lineup is actually pretty effective because Arceneaux's versatility allows you to do a lot of things offensively and defensively as if he had 4 guards, because he's not going to get outsized because of his length and things like that on defense necessarily. He does pretty good job rebounding the basketball. Milos rebounding the basketball pretty well, actually helps that as well. So I almost wonder how much of that was strategy versus being forced into it, or some combination of the two. They didn't play a lot until the last 5 minutes of the game. We also, to be fair, did see when both Lott and Mercy Miller were in, the lead kind of slipped away. So maybe there was some matchup thing there that they weren't too keen on early. I like the small ball lineup as we'll play this for about 12 to 15 minutes a game to make sure you have to get ready for it kind of an aspect of what they do. It really is an effective lineup because of how long and quick it is. I don't think you can go to it for long stretches of the game or anything like that, but I think, 4 minutes here, 4 minutes there, make them change it up, make them change up what they're doing, make them keep up with you and let you dictate the pace. I like that a lot out of Houston. And so they might have gotten their hands forced into it this week or this Tuesday. But ultimately, I think that's a good thing for them. Ken responds to that. It was nice to see Sharp zeroed in again. I think the same thing with those spacing in the small lineups. You can't help off of Terrance the same way you can help off of Jawan, Vier, Jojo, right? Because from 3, they're not really the same kind of threat. So when one of them is outside the lane, that guy can kind of be a roamer helper type. When it's Terrance, Malik, Milos, Emanuel, pick your poison. You can't really help off those guys outside in the perimeter, right? And then you had Jawan in the mix as the guy that was inside passing the ball. That opens up a lot of things. Right now, on the whole, obviously, other things could fix in this one. We got to find a way to get Tugler on the floor more. He's got to stay on the floor when he's out there. He's too dominant a force physically to not be able to play meaningful minutes, even in a blowout of a game. I know this game gets finished at 15, but ultimately, I think that this game was played in the low 20s was the difference from most of the second half, and that's more what it felt like. And I think that'd be the segment 3 is going to be where we have concerns, and that's one of the things I think we'll talk about there. But I want to talk about where this leaves Houston ahead of the weekend, getting into the big games. Before we get into that, I want to remind you guys today's show is brought to you by TurboTax, and this message is from our sponsor, Intuit TurboTax. Taxes was dealing with piles of paperwork and frustrating forms, and then waiting and wondering and worrying if you were going to get any money back. Now, Taxes is easily uploading your forms to a TurboTax expert who's matched to your unique tax situation, an expert who's backed by the latest technology with cross-checks of millions of data points for 100% accuracy. While they work on your taxes, you can get real-time updates on their progress and get the most money back guaranteed, all while you go about your day. No stressing, no worrying, no waiting. Now, this is Taxes Intuit TurboTax. It is expert now at turbotax.com. Only available at TurboTax full live service, real-time updates on iOS mobile app. See guaranteed details at turbotax.com/guarantees. Parker Ainsworth, Locked On Coogs, talking about Houston's big win over Arizona State, 80-65. And I have to say that one of the dominating storylines in this game was weirdly not actually this game. It was looking at the Big 12 as a whole. And I have to say that as you looked at the Big 12 as a whole, a lot of people got talk where they're talking about standings and other big things happening and things like that. Now, in this game, Houston cruised and all of that, but on other TV channels, you had BYU put a beat down on Kansas. You had Texas Tech drop one in Fort Worth to TCU. And you're looking at the conference, and all of a sudden, Houston's got a 2-game lead on Arizona, who they own the tiebreaker with because Houston won their lone meeting over the weekend. Houston's got a 3-game lead over Iowa State heading into the matchup this weekend. A win over Iowa State this weekend in the Fertitta Center with College Game Day, they would effectively put Iowa State away as far as Houston's concerned. Houston will turn around and play Texas Tech on Monday in Lubbock. Now, Texas Tech is Houston's lone conference loss. But if they were to win in Lubbock on Monday, that again kind of flips around, negates that tiebreaker, and Texas Tech is going into that game, or going into the weekend, I should say, 3 games back of Houston now. BYU, who I guess you can say put a beat down on Kansas, should feel good about themselves, playing pretty good basketball right now. Houston throttled earlier this season and is up by 5 games on. Kansas is 6 games back. Baylor is 6 games back. TCU, Utah. It just keeps on going. The gap continues to widen across the top half of this conference for Houston. And I still think Houston loses another game in conference. I don't know if it's Iowa State, Texas Tech. They get upset by someone later. I don't know. I don't think they go through the conference as a one-loss team this year. Now, I'm going to have talked myself into them beating everyone they play, and I don't see anyone that jumps off the schedule for Houston that's like, oh, they're definitely going to lose that one, because there's no team in America that I feel that way about. For all I know, it could be the Cincinnati game at home, just kind of an off one, right? I don't know what the deal will be. It feels like it's just too weird a conference, too weird a sport, for an ultimate like to go across the conference like that. The one I think betting favorites would pick is that playing at Tech Monday night is probably not great, right? I'm not the sports gambler guy. I check FanDuel lines because FanDuel's a good buddy for us, but I feel like that's, I guess, the one people would be picking. Either way, if Houston finishes conference with just 2 losses right now, they win the conference. And they might get to 3 or whatever the case may be. It's unprecedented to just step into a conference like Houston's done and be this dominant 2 years in a row. They won the conference by 2 games in the regular season last year, and they're on track to do better in year 2. And I don't mean to spoil the pooch for everyone outside of the city of Houston in this conference, but with the number 2 recruiting class in America coming in, I don't think it's getting easier for those other folks. I just don't. And I just can't. I stare at this all the time. Like, I cannot believe. And again, like there's never been a loss for Houston that I've been like, oh, I can't. Of course they were going to lose that one or whatever, right? There's never been a loss for Houston where I'm like, oh, I knew this was coming or anything like that. Like, I thought they should have beat Auburn, they should have beat Alabama, they should beat San Diego State, they should have beat Tech, all those things, right? A year ago, they should have beat TCU, should beat Iowa State, should beat Kansas and Fog, all those things, right? But at the end of the day, where we sit here is that even with those coulda, woulda, shoulda kind of moments, what Houston's doing is incredible. And Houston's got these nights against Arizona State like they did tonight where, like, yeah, they let their foot off the gas, the reserves at the end of the game or whatever. But on the whole, this team is putting away everyone they walk in front of. I mean, they've got the one loss to Texas Tech in overtime, and we outlined afterwards how that technical guys getting tossed might have helped their shooting percentages in Lubbock or whatever. That's their only loss since the weekend after Thanksgiving. That's incredible. And then, never mind that those 3 losses that were in November, 2 of those against teams that are currently in the top 5, right? I mean, that's what we're talking about here, right? That this team continues to astonish, and I have trouble with putting things down here as far as like what to really like. How do we keep talking about this? Because it feels so normal and nothing about it is, right? Ken says he's hoping we run the table the rest of the season. The fact that we won't won tonight and Tech loss gives us appreciated breathing room. If Houston can swap loss against Texas Tech and Iowa State, I feel pretty confident on a first place finish. If we do run the table, how should we approach the Big 12 tournament? I think all these questions about running the table are interesting because, again, I don't see a game that I would predict Houston to lose. I guess, again, like I said, Tech is probably the closest thing to a gambler's push. But I think as far as like, obviously they're pushing to run the table in conference, that's more important. And then conference tournament, you just kind of approach each game like you want to win it. But ultimately, like, you also know that this team is not built to win 4 games in 4 days. It's built to win 2 tough ones in 3 days. It's built to win a regular season that you grind through. It's built to win those other kinds of things. And so you honestly, like, you just kind of let the conference tournament fall where it may. And last year, you got the conference tournament championship game, got smoked in that game. It didn't matter. You got a 1 seed. I wonder if people out there picking seeds are waiting to see if Houston runs table or not. Because right now it looks like Houston's currently slotted in as a 2 seed in March Madness. Which 2 seed would kind of change which bracket they got to pick and go to and where they play and so on, right? And honestly, we've heard Sampson say it, and I would agree with it. This idea of being healthy when the tournament happens is more important than having the right seed. But on the whole, you kind of want both if you can, right? And I wonder, I mean, if they were to run the table in the Big 12, they'd have beaten the only team in conference that beat them. That loss would have been in overtime. They'd have run through the Big 12. Their other 3 losses are one's an odd San Diego State thing for the 3rd game in 4 days. 2 of the other losses are against top 5 teams in America. I think they'd have a hard time keeping Houston off of the 1 line. All that to be said, that you got to do the job in front of you first, right? That's all down the road. But in looking at like where Houston's at going into the weekend, they're stretching that arm out kind of like the kid at the big kid in the playground, and you try to swing at them, and they put their head on your hand on your forehead, so you can't swing your arms at them and punch them. They're just kind of doing that to the entire Big 12 right now. Really, really incredible. And these wins like Arizona State stack up, but beating Arizona over the weekend is also a big part of that. Now, things are not all peachy. Things are not all roses. People have real concerns. I don't want to invalidate those, but I do want to talk about the 2 concerns I guess people have coming out of this game where Houston beats Arizona State 80-65 in a second. Locked On Coogs, Parker Ainsworth talking about Houston's 80-65 win over Arizona State. And there were some concerns I think people had in this one. And I don't want to like act like it's all roses and those didn't happen, that those don't exist, right? That wouldn't be fair. I think my first concern was honestly about 2 minutes into the game. Jojo Tugler's really, really important to this team. He's obviously starting center. That's a big deal. But he's such a unique center in what all he can do defensively, between the length and strength helping him cover big guys, the athleticism helping him cover perimeter guys, the switchability that offers, right? Just the high motor. I mean, one of the highest motors in all of college basketball right now. All of those things make him a guy that Houston has to have in rotation to be able to win important close games. Houston won this game running away. Again, it was in the 20-point differential range for most of the second half. But Tugler played just 8 minutes because he can't get out of his own way in terms of foul trouble. And I don't mean to say like that anyone on the Houston staff needs to take my coaching advice, but whenever I've had a kid like this that has trouble not fouling, the argument I always get in with them afterwards is like, okay, I can live with XYZ as fouls, these ABC, these hustle fouls, right? Where you're just going for a rebound, bodies collide, a loose ball, you hit their guy a little too hard going for them. I can live with those kinds of things. That's what makes you who you are, Jojo Tugler. The problem becomes like the illegal screen when you're moving your hip, or the frustration, forearm check because you got beat backdoor one time, or those kinds of things where the problems come in. Because if you only had the hustle fouls, you could end up having 3 or 4 games, right? It's those other things added on to this that make for problems. And I think the thing that like Sampson the most problem with in game, it looked like to me, and the thing I think that he's most accurate, most right about having a problem with was the moving screen call. Uh, First of all, a lot of times the guard dribbling the ball handler's in charge of whether or not that ends up becoming a moving screen. So I get that too. But also Tugler was just not set and continued to lean well after the ball was declaring his way. Not great, right? Not great. And I understand that he also, has had games where he plays 34, 38 minutes. Like this is not an every game kind of thing. It does feel like once every 4 or 5 games, though, he's finding his way into this foul trouble. And if they're going to win in March, if they're going to win the whole thing, cut down nets and San Antonio, they got to win 6 games. My odds would indicate that at least one of those, statistically, he's going to be in severe foul trouble. And that's going to put Houston in a bad spot. They don't have a lot of center depth, right? Roberts, Francis, get a couple minutes out of a lot. That's really all you have, right? Especially with McFarland and the season-ending injury before the season even started, right? I don't know how much McFarland would get to play or anything like that, but it obviously hurts some. This just feels like the kind of thing that Houston's going to be banking on, not impacting them in a game that really matters. I will say, you typically see in those big-time games that refs let a little bit more of the ticky-tack stuff go or whatever, because they understand that part of this is competing. But on the whole, Tugler's got to find ways to be under control in the controllable moments, and that'll help him let loose in those moments where he's got to go be the dog, right? And I think that's the frustrating part about this, is that you don't want to take all of that anger and aggression out of it. And the way he plays, the high motor, the ferocity, that's part of the deal. That's what we want. It's about containing it, angling it, directing it, etc. And so I think that's one of the 2 concerns I've got. The other concern I think is everyone's got is Houston was up by a lot in this game. I mean, let me make sure I got my numbers right here. But at about the 6-minute mark, Houston's up by 23. 23-point lead at the 6-minute mark. Houston managed to win by 15. The lead got down to 11 at one point. And ultimately, I think the deal there is that lineup that was in, it was a couple deep bench guys and Sedlot and Mercy Miller. You had Emanuel Sharp out there to kind of get his shots up, but he's also playing the bum ankle, right? Malik Wilson out there kind of as a reward for having played so well off the bench earlier in the game. And then you had Milos Uzan running point. And ultimately, what you saw was that lineup kind of lacked the defensive pressure that the starters did, right? It allowed for some more open shots at Arizona State, who went on an 11-0 run. I guess that means the lead got down to 12. 11-0 run. It allowed for, frankly, some sloppier offense. Mercy Miller had went isolation a couple times. A lot lost the ball off his hands and offensive rebound one time. Those kinds of things happen more with backups. That combination did not look great. I don't know that I'm as concerned about that one myself. And here's why, right? I feel like my reason, I'm not as sure about that because, A, if we're ever running out that lineup, Milos, Emanuel, Mercy, Malik, and said, it is either a Texas A&M tournament game last year scenario where everyone's fouled out and that's all that's left, or is a game like this one where they're up 20 and they're wasting the clock to win the game, right? Now, obviously one of the situations is a lot different than the other. But what I kind of like is, and I like that Sampson does, is he gives it 3 or 4 minutes before he pulls the plug. And I think that's a good thing. And I think it's a good thing because what you'll see in March is if you've got to put Mercy out there, hopefully you don't put that whole lineup out there. But if you've got to put Mercy out there, right, later in the season, he's earned some game reps in those minutes. And honestly, he's failed. They went to the film room the next day. They broke it down. He probably heard a few criticisms, to say the least, and got better from it. Said it's got to go in there like he did last year against Kansas and Hunter Dickinson. He goes in there with a little bit different role this year. A couple things going wrong. They go to the film room the next day. They break it down. They criticize him. It gets better. It gets fixed. This program lives on adjustments and getting better and working off of that kind of tape, right? And so that he lets this ride for 3, 4, 5 minutes of basketball. And honestly, the lead got down too tight. And I understand people, especially I think the gambling line for this was 11.5. So we got down to 12. Some people were really fretting, right? Some people probably had no stake in either team. All of a sudden were really upset, right? I feel like big picture that's good for the program. Mercy's just a freshman and is a very talented scorer. He didn't finish the layup because it was contested, but he had a great Euro step move in the lane in this one. Really, really good looking athletic finish. Just didn't quite fall. We've seen what Seth can do when asked to do big things in the in games last year, like Kansas and stuff like that. And so I think that on the whole, these kind of nights, this is not a concern of mine because I think on the whole, these kind of nights are going to be good for the program down the stretch. Now I'm open to hearing feedback, people saying otherwise. Tell me in the comments down below what you thought about the last 5 minutes, 6 minutes, I should say now, of basketball in this game. I will say it was nice to see when Houston needed to put the starters in and got guys in. Joe Mendez asked question of the night, and this will be where we wrap up on. Joe asked about Koa Pete being at tonight's game, this past Saturday's game. Is he still considering coming to University of Houston? I have not heard anything more than, as far as Koa Pete goes, that he is still very open to all things considered. I do think that there is some pull to stay home in Arizona. I don't think that that's fictional. I think the issue is that he doesn't like either of those programs quite as much. From like the way Arizona uses their power forwards to the way that Arizona State has trouble finding rosters to compete and those kinds of things like that. And so I think ultimately he wants to play for a winner. He wants to play as a stretch 4. And he wants to play somewhere he'll get minutes to get on the floor and be a one and done. And I think that honestly, finding those things in his home state of Arizona is proving to be difficult. And what of that, all of a sudden, when you throw in being at home, all those 4 things pulls the Venn diagrams of this in whatever direction is challenging. And I don't mean to get upset about where the kid goes. Houston's got a great 2025 class if he doesn't come. I will say that I don't think it's off the table. So people are acting like there's no chance and stuff like that. It's not off the table as of anyone I've talked to. Admittedly, it's been 5 or 6 days now, but it's not off the table. I don't need to say that it's happening. It's not off the table. Houston's got spots, and frankly, for what it's worth, he's the kind of athlete you make spots for. He's the kind of athlete that, frankly, when Kelvin Sampson said, forget how many times he said it, but he said something along the stretch of like, hey, man, you always have 14 roster spots for your 15th guy because you never know what's going to happen. And so when you've got guys like Cole play the 4 and Sanak play the 5, and you got a roster full of guys that would be potential pros very quickly. I mean, Isaiah Harwell could be a pro one and done. Kingston Fleming is athletic to be a pro one and done. Chris Sanak is projected to be a pro one and done. So who knows what these kind of guys come through as. I will say that what I like about each of these guys, a lot like I liked about Jarris when Jarris came through, obviously, is that as one and done, they chose Houston because they wanted to get coached by Sampson however long they're in school for. And I say however long because obviously everything's dependent on how things go. But they want that kind of coaching development improvement for however long they're in school. And I think that takes a very particular guy. It's why Houston doesn't go after every single 5-star prospect, but the ones they do are very intentionally picked. And Cole would be absolutely one of those guys. He's got all kinds of relatives that are pro football players and college football players. He understands the grind and the work ethic. I think the truth is that guy is a lottery pick making millions. You can't tell a kid to turn down millions of dollars. You just can't do it. So we'll see where what he ends up doing. If these two games sway him, where Houston beats Arizona and Arizona State in about 48-hour span. And that's truthfully, might be enough to topple some things. It might not. We'll see. It's hard to get over that whole he is from their kind of point of view. Locked On Coogs, we'll be breaking it down each and every day here. Now that we're back on track, hopefully no more funerals to go to anytime soon. Locked On Coogs, proud member of the Locked On Podcast Network. That means your team every day. Go Cougs.